I sat on the hood of a car by plate 128, watching and waiting. When they finally came out, her face drained of color, and she avoided my gaze entirely. He raised his hands, already defensive. I shook my head, "Relax, you're not worth it," and got in my car, driving away. This whole mess started with a long, tangled history. I'd met Ethan when his family moved in next door. We were both 8, the only boys around, and soon, we were as close as brothers. By high school, Ethan and I were inseparable. Then, in 10th grade, I met Chloe, and we became a serious couple by senior year. Ethan dated Megan Davis, and the four of us often went out together. Prom night was something of a milestone. Chloe and I shared our first intimate moment, with Ethan and Megan in the next room doing the same. It felt like we'd crossed a line, one that marked the end of high school and the start of something more adult. After graduation, Ethan joined the Navy while Chloe and I went to college. I studied civil engineering at Eastern Michigan, and she studied IT at the University of Michigan. The schools weren't far apart, but our relationship still suffered. Chloe canceled our plans occasionally, and I didn't think much of it until friends from U of M tipped me off that she'd been seen with other guys. One night, I decided to see for myself. I followed her and some guy to a restaurant. When she noticed me, she pulled away from him fast, like she'd been caught. Their chemistry was obvious. This wasn't a one-time meeting. I sat down alone, watching her steal nervous glances my way. I just ate my meal, pretending not to notice, and left without a word. Friday, our date night came and went. I didn't call, didn't cancel, just stayed home and read. Saturday, I hit a party at Delta Phi, and that's when I met Samantha, a breath of fresh air. By Sunday, I was back in study mode when my doorbell rang. Peering through the telescope, I saw Chloe outside. I opened the door, and she immediately pushed her way in. "Where were you Friday night? And why didn't you answer my calls?" she demanded, glaring. I shut the door and smirked. "Which question do you want answered first?" "What?" She seemed flustered. "You asked 3 questions. Pick one," I replied. "Don't mess with me, Nick. What's going on?" "Fine," I shrugged. "First, I was here. Then, I went to a party on Saturday. As for the phone, it was unplugged. And where was I Friday night? Right here, reading a book. Why didn't you tell me you weren't coming?" "Thought you might be occupied with your boyfriend," I replied, watching her reaction. "Boyfriend? You're my boyfriend, Nick." "Then who was that guy you were practically cuddling with at the restaurant on Thursday?" She rolled her eyes. "Just a friend. It's no big deal." "Looked like more than that. If it's so innocent, why didn't you say hi? Introduce me to him?" She bristled. "Why didn't you come up if it bothered you?" "Because I wanted to see how you acted when you thought I wasn't watching," I replied. "And it looks like what I heard was true. You've been going out with other guys, even on nights we had plans." Her patience snapped. "You don't own me, Nick. We're not exclusive." "Really? That ring and leather sweater I gave you in high school mean nothing now?" "Nick, that's high school stuff. Grow up." "Fine," I replied. "I met someone at the party, and she gave me her number. I'll go ahead and call her." Chloe's face hardened. "Go ahead." "I don't care," she spat, storming out. Watching her leave, I realized she hadn't even tried to make an excuse, hadn't promised she'd change. Nothing. It was like she was already done with me. Maybe she just wanted the freedom to do what she wanted without a second thought. The next week, I focused on my classes. By Thursday, I decided to call Samantha, and we hit it off right away. We made plans for Friday night, and I picked her up for dinner. Afterward, she suggested a party at an apartment in Belleville. We arrived around 8, and, just my luck, the first people I saw were Chloe and the guy from the restaurant. "Great," I muttered. Samantha caught on. "What's wrong?" I nodded in their direction. "Them. I know her." "Miss Piggy?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. I nodded, barely able to hide my smirk. "Yeah, that's what she goes by." Samantha laughed. "What did she do to earn that?" "Too much to count," I replied, feeling the finality of it. "Are you really sure about her?" Samantha asked, raising an eyebrow. "What do you call someone who's supposed to be committed but still flirts with other men when her partner's not around?" I shrugged. "That's what I've been wondering. I can't confirm it firsthand, but plenty of guys have stories. You didn't mention how you know her, Samantha said, eyes curious. I was the guy she was going to marry until I caught her last Thursday, with the guy she's with now. Well, at least the drama's behind you. Yep. We officially ended it on Sunday, I replied, relieved. What are the odds I'd hear from you if I hadn't caught her Thursday? Slim to none, she laughed. But here we are, so let's enjoy ourselves. She took my hand, leading me to meet the party host. Chloe stood to the side, visibly shocked when she spotted me. Whether it was seeing me with someone else or being caught with her new boyfriend, I couldn't tell. Ignoring her, Samantha introduced me to Daniel and his wife, Elise, and we chatted before grabbing drinks. Downstairs, the basement had become a dance floor, and Samantha and I joined the fun. We danced, mingled, and laughed the night away, occasionally catching Chloe's unreadable stares. Around 11, Samantha suggested heading out since she had plans the next day. As I drove her home, she remarked, "Your ex couldn't take her eyes off you tonight. Probably surprised to see me there, especially with you." No, she seemed pretty uncomfortable seeing you with someone else. Her problem, I replied. She ended things. Maybe, but it looked like she regrets it. Well, she'll have to get used to it, I said firmly. So, will I see more of you, or are you going to start dating around? I prefer dating one girl at a time. I had a great time tonight. If you're interested, you'll be the only one. What if I'm not ready for something exclusive? Then I'll ask someone else. But if I find someone who says yes, then that's who I'll stick with. Samantha smiled. I like your style. How about tomorrow night? Sounds good. I walked her to her door, where she paused, then leaned in. I don't usually kiss on the first date, she whispered, but there's a first time for everything. She kissed me goodnight, and as she stepped inside, she called back, "See you tomorrow." When I got home, my dad mentioned that Chloe had called, sounding upset. It's late, I replied. I'll call her in the morning. Saturday morning, I slept in, then made my way to the kitchen for coffee. Chloe called twice this morning, my mom said, urging me to return her call. Not until I've had my coffee. Are things okay between you two? I sighed. It's complicated. She should know why. Just then, the phone rang, and my mom answered, passing it to me. It's Chloe. Hello? I answered. Why didn't you call? She demanded. I got in late and went to bed. Not what I meant. Why didn't you call me for our usual Friday night date? We discussed this last Sunday, Chloe. You said we weren't exclusive and agreed to see other people. When I told you I'd do the same, you stormed off. That's not what I meant, Nick. You should have understood. Come on, Chloe. I saw you with that guy last Thursday. You can't tell me that was nothing. I wasn't with him, Nick. I went alone, and he happened to be there. Right. Believe what you want, but it doesn't change anything. I've heard enough about you, including why people call you Miss Piggy. I don't know what you've heard, but it's not true. After seeing you with that friend at the restaurant, I'm not buying it. You're not interested in a committed relationship, and I'm not interested in being just one of many. So please, return my ring and leather sweater. They mean nothing to you now, anyway. Goodbye, Chloe. Sounds like that's settled, my mom remarked. Yep. She made her choice, and I'm not about to be part of her rotation, I replied. In the meantime, Samantha became a real bright spot. I stayed in touch with Ethan through letters. He graduated training and joined a Navy construction battalion, also known as the SEALs, learning everything from building to demolition. He never asked about Megan, and I didn't bring her up. No point in souring his new life with her drama. Meanwhile, Megan was busy making the rounds. Within a week of Ethan's deployment, she'd moved in with a coworker, then switched to another guy a month later. Rumor had it she was entertaining his friends, too. Eventually, she dropped off the map until one day, I got a letter from Ethan. He'd finished his training and was stationed in Norfolk, eager to settle down. He'd summoned Megan to join him, hoping for a fresh start. I wish you could be my best man, he wrote. The sooner we marry, the sooner we can get housing on base. Poor Ethan. As soon as he left, she'd found someone else. It was a reminder that I was fortunate to have the stability my grandparents' college fund provided. My grandparents' college fund was more than generous. covering my tuition and even rent for an off-campus apartment. So, by junior year, Samantha and I decided to move in together, giving me a taste of family life, which I was starting to realize I wanted. Living with her felt natural, and after about 6 months, I even began thinking about making it permanent. Still, I had doubts. It felt almost too perfect. I didn't voice those thoughts until one day, almost offhandedly, I mentioned I'd been looking at engagement rings. That's when Samantha revealed her plan to return to California after graduation to marry her childhood sweetheart, Michael, who was studying abroad on a Rhodes Scholarship. They'd agreed on an open relationship, knowing it was unrealistic to be faithful during years of separation. "It won't change things for us, Nick," she assured me, but it did, for me, anyway. Suddenly, what I'd seen as a committed partnership felt more like an arrangement. I realized I wanted something real and lasting, not just physical connection. Our relationship slowly cooled, and about 4 months later, she noticed. "You don't seem happy here, do you?" she asked one night. I told her the truth, and she nodded, saying she wished she could give me what I wanted, but loved Michael too much to let go. We agreed to part ways, and a week later, I was back home in my old room. The next Friday, Mom called up from downstairs, saying someone was there to see me. I came down to find Chloe chatting with her. When Mom saw me, she gave me a knowing look and slipped into the kitchen, leaving us alone. "Hi, Nick," Chloe said softly. "Hey, Chloe. How've you been?" I asked, surprised but curious. She hesitated, then said, "Samantha called me. She mentioned you're single again and, well, she thought I shouldn't waste any time if I wanted to be first in line." I raised an eyebrow. "Why compete for a spot at all, Chloe?" She gave a small smile and lifted her left hand, revealing my old high school ring still on her finger. "I never returned this, Nick." A bit taken aback, I stayed quiet. Then she added, "There's a party at Grace Thompson's tonight. Want to come? You know, just to show everyone you're mine again." That night, she made a point of staying close to me, sending a clear message to everyone at the party. It felt strange but also familiar, like slipping back into an old role. On the drive home, Chloe was quiet, staring out the window. When we pulled up at her place, I suggested, "How about looking for an apartment together this weekend? It'd be easier than running back and forth." She looked at me, surprised. "Are you serious?" I nodded. It crossed my mind. "Then let's do it," she smiled, her excitement clear. Within a week, we found a 2-bedroom apartment between Ann Arbor and Ypsilanti. We converted the second bedroom into an office, setting up desks for both of us, and life settled into an easy routine. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of real stability. About a month later, Ethan came home on leave, and he spent a lot of time with us. Watching him and Megan together, they seemed content, and I started to question my earlier suspicions about her. But 3 weeks after Ethan's return to duty, Megan came over unexpectedly, looking nervous. It wasn't long before rumors spread that, with Ethan now in Iraq, she'd been seeing someone else. When Megan finally visited Ethan in Norfolk, I heard more unsettling stories, wild parties, even supposed encounters with her ex. I thought about telling Ethan, but Chloe urged me to stay out of it. "It's their business, Nick. For all we know, they have an open arrangement. Lots of military couples do." "I doubt Ethan's that type," I replied. "Maybe, but telling him could just make things worse," she argued. "It's his choice to trust her." Reluctantly, I agreed to let it go, though I couldn't shake a feeling of unease. Ethan came back from Afghanistan just in time to be my best man when Chloe and I got married. After his discharge, he and Megan moved back home, and Ethan landed a job as a heavy equipment operator. For the next 2 years, the Marshalls became regular visitors, coming over every couple of weeks. They seemed steady, and any suspicion I had about Megan faded over time. Then, Ethan's company won a contract to lay a pipeline in Alaska, and he made the tough decision to leave Megan at home, considering the harsh conditions he'd face. Initially, everything seemed fine, but barely a week after he left, Megan was seen at a local motel with Ethan's boss, Daniel Carter. Soon, Daniel's car was spotted parked at Ethan's house almost every night. As the project in Alaska ran into complications, Ethan's absence was extended by another 2 months, leaving him in the dark about what was happening back home. Megan, meanwhile, seemed perfectly content to continue her nightly rendezvous with Daniel, even as neighbors started to notice and talk. Watching it all unfold, I felt deeply for Ethan. Here he was, out there in brutal conditions, working tirelessly to secure a future for them both, while Megan was back home, enjoying herself with his boss. I couldn't help but dread the inevitable fallout when he finally returned. It was by pure coincidence that Chloe and Megan shared the same doctor. One day, Chloe was in the waiting room when she overheard Megan receiving troubling news. Megan had just learned she was 7 weeks pregnant, yet Ethan had been away on deployment for over 3 months. Chloe didn't hear it directly from Megan. 2 nurses who knew us from high school filled her in later. They had little hesitation to gossip, given Chloe's connection to Megan, and asked her, half in jest, how she thought Ethan might react to the news. In our small-town world, patient confidentiality sometimes bends, especially when old connections are involved. Chloe shrugged it off at first, figuring Megan would handle things discreetly before Ethan returned. She'll probably opt for an abortion, and that'll be the end of it, she guessed, thinking Megan would keep this complication under wraps. But as it turned out, nothing about the situation went as she expected. Someone, though Chloe was careful not to say who, got word to Ethan about the pregnancy and the strong suspicions of Megan's affair. When he returned from deployment, Ethan didn't go directly home. Instead, he rented a car and parked a short distance from his own house. He waited, and before long, he saw Daniel Carter drive up and enter. After giving them 15 minutes, Ethan calmly walked up to the front door, a digital camera in hand. Ethan's patience had a purpose. Inside, he took several quick shots, capturing Carter and Megan together. The confrontation escalated almost instantly, and Carter lunged toward Ethan, apparently to grab the camera. Ethan's Canon Rebel, set to continuous mode, documented the sequence. Carter charging at Ethan, Ethan standing his ground. The scene was intense enough that neighbors called the police, who arrived as an ambulance took Carter to the hospital. Initially, the police considered detaining Ethan, but he showed them the photos, which clearly captured Carter advancing toward him. Satisfied that he'd acted in self-defense, they let Ethan go. Not long afterward, Megan packed a single suitcase, locked the house, and left, essentially ending her marriage on the spot. The divorce proceeded smoothly after that. Ethan then filed a lawsuit against Carter, alleging alienation of affection and even molestation, claiming that Carter had strategically sent him away to pursue Megan. Carter had the option to settle quietly, but he chose to fight it, which only made the affair with Megan even more public. Eventually, the jury sided with Ethan, awarding him a significant $1.3 million. After taxes and legal fees, Ethan was left with over $750,000. He used the money to pay off his house, add a pool, and buy a new truck. Megan, meanwhile, disappeared from town soon after the divorce was finalized, with rumors circulating that she'd left out of embarrassment. Carter's reputation took a heavy hit. To pay off the settlement, he had to sell off several assets, and his business suffered as clients distanced themselves, wary of his actions. With some of his money still left, Ethan approached me with a business idea. To start a construction firm together, taking on the clients Carter had lost. I would focus on design, while Ethan handled the construction side. After some discussion with Chloe, I agreed, and R&J Constructors was born. We quickly attracted a significant number of Carter's former clients and eventually even outperformed him on several key projects. Ethan made sure that people knew every time we beat Carter, slowly building our reputation in the industry. The next 5 years went by quickly. Ethan dated around but never found someone he wanted to settle down with. He often joined Chloe and me for dinners, usually bringing along whichever girlfriend he was seeing at the time. Chloe, meanwhile, was doing exceptionally well in her own career, climbing to the role of regional manager and positioning herself as a top candidate for vice president. Our life together felt stable, better than I'd ever hoped. Everything seemed to be in place, but maybe that's when the first cracks appeared, when I thought things couldn't get better. One Tuesday afternoon, just after wrapping up a lunch meeting with a client, I unexpectedly ran into Daniel Carter. He suggested we grab a drink, and though I didn't have any personal animosity toward him, I was curious about his motives. I never believed he'd intentionally sent Ethan out of town just to pursue Megan. Given her behavior, it seemed more likely she had approached him. As we sat down, Daniel leaned in and asked, "So, how's business?" "Can't complain," I replied, keeping it brief. "Ever thought about selling?" he asked, his tone oddly serious. "Selling? Why would I consider that?" I responded, caught off guard. "To make Ethan my partner," he replied. I laughed. "Are you out of your mind?" Daniel shook his head, pulling a folder out of his briefcase. "Take a look at this." Curious, I opened the folder, and my stomach dropped. Inside were photos of Chloe and Ethan entering a motel room together, holding hands. A few images showed them in various poses, hugging, leaning close, and even kissing in public spots. I stared at the pictures, hardly believing what I was seeing. Daniel sighed, watching my reaction. "Look, I didn't know she was your wife at first. I hired a private investigator, hoping to get something on Ethan. When I got these, I noticed the rings. Then I realized the truth." "Why show me?" I asked, barely containing the mix of betrayal and shock. Daniel looked down. "I never intended to drive Ethan out of town for Megan. She walked into my office, closed the door, and made her intentions clear. She told me, 'Since you sent Ethan away, you're responsible for taking care of me until he returns.' It wasn't my idea." I processed his words as I glanced back at the photos. The betrayal felt staggering, the world I thought I understood now looking foreign and uncertain. What began as a casual drink had turned into a revelation that left me wondering about everything I thought I knew. In that moment, I felt as if the ground had shifted under me, and I could no longer trust anything that once felt certain. To me, this entire disaster fell on Ethan. Everyone knew about Megan's reputation, dating back to high school. Ethan should have seen it, but he allowed himself to be blindsided. Daniel Carter, however, had his own vendetta. "Ethan hit me hard with that lawsuit, and I'm going to hit back," he told me, bitterness evident in his voice. "Sorry you're caught in the crossfire, Nick. How long has this been going on?" I asked, still stunned by what Daniel had shown me. "According to my investigator, over a year, possibly longer," Daniel replied. "But if Chloe was careful, why would you suspect anything? Then why the offer to buy me out?" I asked, growing wary. "What do you gain by becoming Ethan's partner?" Daniel leaned forward, voice low. "Think of it as equal partnership. Ethan will want Plan A. I'll push for Plan B, whatever's opposite. And I'll control pricing, undercutting until the business sinks. Ethan will suffer, and I'll get my revenge." "But so will I," I pointed out, incredulous. "Not entirely," Daniel said smoothly. "If it collapses, I can liquidate assets and recover most of my investment. Besides, I have other businesses that'll undercut his bids." "So, are you in?" "Maybe," I replied cautiously, keeping my thoughts hidden. "But I'll need to do my own digging first. If I decide to move forward, I'll call you." I threw out a tentative price, and he agreed, saying he'd wait to hear back. Leaving that meeting, I felt blindsided. How had Chloe and Ethan carried this on for a year without me noticing? I hadn't seen a single sign from Chloe, no distance, no change in affection. While the evidence Daniel showed looked solid, I couldn't ignore the possibility of tampering given his motives. I needed absolute proof before making any drastic moves. I contacted a friend at an insurance agency for a private investigator referral, and within days, I had confirmation. Ethan and Chloe had been meeting weekly at the Comfort Inn on Melrose, usually on Wednesdays. I wasn't sure how Chloe got the time off work, but the investigator provided photos, dates, and receipts. It was undeniable. The path forward was clear, though it wouldn't be simple. I spent 2 hours consulting my lawyer, who outlined my options. Although our state was no fault, the lawyer explained that clear evidence of infidelity could slightly shift asset division in my favor. However, there was still the issue of my stake in the business. Selling it directly would entitle Chloe to half of the proceeds, and I couldn't let that happen. I made arrangements to sell my share to Daniel for a third of its actual worth. A third of the payment went into a separate account in my name, and the other 2/3 into an offshore account. We agreed Daniel wouldn't step into the office or claim my desk until the following Monday, giving me time to finalize everything. With the groundwork laid, I put my plan into action on the next Wednesday. I told our receptionist, Maria, that I'd be out for a dentist appointment and might not return if I wasn't feeling well. Once Chloe left for work, I went home and arranged for a locksmith to change all the locks. Then I cleared out our joint bank accounts and the safe deposit box. My lawyer advised taking only half, but I was resolute. Chloe wasn't getting anything without a fight. Around noon, my investigator called, confirming Chloe and Ethan had checked into room 128 at the Comfort Inn. I drove over, exchanged a few words with the detective, and parked nearby, waiting. When they finally emerged, Chloe froze at the sight of me. Ethan took a step back, hands raised defensively. I just gave them a slight smirk and said, "Relax, you're not worth it," before turning and leaving. As I walked to my car, a process server approached them, delivering a thick packet of papers. Inside were Chloe's divorce papers and a temporary restraining order, requiring her to stay 500 feet away from me and our home. A small measure, but it ensured I'd have some peace during the proceedings. As I drove away, a mix of resolve and disbelief settled over me. Everything had fallen into place almost too smoothly. I'd taken precautions, though, and there was little Chloe could do but contest the terms if she chose. This was only the beginning of what was sure to be a messy ending, but I wasn't going to let her walk away easily. The next few days blurred by in meetings with my lawyer and final arrangements. I hadn't told family or friends, but I knew they'd learn the truth eventually. Strangely, the betrayal now felt like something to accept, rather than a wound. Sitting in my empty office on Friday, signing over my stake to Daniel, I thought back to the start of my relationship with Chloe and the easy trust we'd once shared. It felt distant, almost like it had happened to someone else. I wasn't sure what lay ahead, but I knew whatever came next, it would be on my terms. And as for Chloe and Ethan, they would learn soon enough that betrayal came with a cost. Securing my exit and unsettling Chloe required some strategy. I fabricated a story, claiming a third party had tipped me off about Ethan and Chloe discussing my insurance coverage and business shares. This rumor added suspicion that played right into the restraining order, keeping Chloe out of the house until a hearing determined if it would be made permanent. Meanwhile, she couldn't enter without court supervision, and I had no intention of making keys available for the new locks. With Ethan's foreclosure notice, I left a note. "You know how these suits work, right? How does it feel to be on the other side?" I relished the thought of his reaction. Driving away from the motel after they'd been served, I called Daniel. "Everything's set," I said. "Enjoy your first." For a week, I left it all behind. Chloe, the company, the lawsuits, spending my days scuba diving and letting the sound of waves drown out the noise of my life back home. It was the first break I'd had in ages, and each day felt like breathing fresh air after months in a confined space. When I returned and powered up my phone, it flooded with voicemails. Most were from Chloe, as expected, but a surprising 4 were from Ethan. He, of all people, had been calling me, though I couldn't fathom why. In another lifetime, I might have wanted to hear what he had to say, to get some kind of explanation, but now it all felt meaningless. Their betrayals were theirs to grapple with, and I intended to move forward without any more of their interference. After catching up with my attorney, who knew of my trip, he informed me that Chloe had been calling twice daily, trying to arrange access to the house for her belongings. I was about to instruct him to arrange it when a better idea crossed my mind. I called her myself, and she answered on the first ring. Her frustration was evident. "I need my clothes and some personal items," she began immediately. "They won't let me in, even with court supervision, because I don't have a key." "Clothes?" I replied with feigned surprise. "There's nothing left for you to collect. I donated everything to Goodwill. Didn't need reminders of your betrayal cluttering my life." "What?" she snapped, her anger unmistakable. "You had no right to touch my things." "Oh, I had every right," I replied, calm and collected. "Just as you had the right to betray me. Goodbye, Chloe." I ended the call, satisfied that I'd left her reeling. The truth was, I hadn't touched her belongings, which were still in the house. But delaying her access, making her feel like her actions had real consequences, was a small satisfaction. It felt like a way of rebalancing the scales, even if it was petty. Later, I called Maria, our indispensable receptionist who handled everything from the office supplies to balancing the books. She picked up right away. "Hey, Maria, how's the office holding up?" "Not well," she replied, sighing. Ethan and Daniel are at each other's throats all the time. Ethan gives orders, Daniel cancels them. Projects are constantly delayed because they can't agree on anything. Last week, it got so bad they actually had a physical fight. I chuckled. A fight? Seriously? Oh yeah, they were shoving each other. Ethan ended up with a broken nose, she said, sounding amused. You're still working there, though? I almost quit, she admitted. Actually, I handed in my resignation last Friday, but Daniel offered to double my salary if I stayed. So here I am. Besides, I've got my own reasons. Reasons? I asked, sensing more behind her words. She hesitated before responding. I never liked Ethan. He's been inappropriate with me for years, even suggesting he'd let me go if I didn't agree to go on a date with him. And we both know what that meant. When I asked what you'd think if he fired me, he had no response. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, surprised. It was personal, she replied. I handled it. But there's a silver lining now. You're available again. I laughed, a bit surprised. Fair enough. When I'm ready to start dating, I'll keep you in mind. But for now, I'm keeping a low profile. No problem. Just keep me in mind if you ever need some dinner company. That day, my phone rang 16 times, 14 from Chloe, 2 from Ethan. I deleted every message. Whatever they thought they needed to say, I didn't want to hear it. I spent the evening quietly, making myself a simple dinner and finally savoring a sense of peace. Then, on a whim, I called Daniel to check in on how his plan was unfolding. Daniel answered quickly, his tone smug. Not bad at all, Nick. I made sure to be at your desk when Ethan arrived. He stormed in, demanding to know why I was there. I laughed, imagining Ethan's reaction. How did he take it? He was fuming, Daniel said with a chuckle. I told him I was his new partner, and his face just fell. He practically turned red with rage when he picked up our partnership agreement. I thought he'd explode. It was priceless. I pictured the scene, feeling a wave of satisfaction. For so long, everything had felt out of my control, slipping away no matter how hard I tried to hold on. But now, finally, I had let go, and it seemed like Ethan and Chloe were now caught in the chaos they had set in motion. That night, for the first time in a while, I felt truly free from the weight of their betrayals. Moving forward felt natural, something entirely within my grasp. Whatever happened next would be on my terms, with no strings attached. I was ready for it. Not bad. Not bad at all, Daniel said, sounding satisfied. I made sure to be at your desk when Ethan arrived. He saw me, frowned, and demanded to know why I was there. I just smiled and told him I was his new partner. You should have seen his face. Steam practically came out of his ears as he read over the agreement. Daniel didn't waste any time causing trouble. The very first day, Ethan ordered fuel for the equipment at the Wilkins site, but as soon as he left the office, Daniel canceled it. When the loader ran out of fuel, Ethan called Allied and was furious to hear they'd canceled the order. They informed him that I had called it off and suggested he find another supplier. Ethan stormed back and confronted Daniel, who coolly explained that Allied was overcharging and that he was simply seeking better prices. A shouting match ensued, eventually ending in a fistfight. Daniel admitted, I might have underestimated him, but I still landed a few solid punches. I couldn't help but chuckle. Sounds like you've got things under control. Best of luck, Daniel. After hanging up, I sat at my computer, updating my resume and preparing to start a job search. Just as I got into it, the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, there stood Ethan, looking weary. What the hell do you want? I asked, annoyed. We need to talk, Nick, he began, sounding desperate. I didn't mean for things to go this way. Chloe came on to me. I was in a bad place because of Megan. I wasn't thinking straight, but it's not my fault. I stared at him, disgusted. You're saying it's not your fault? You knew she was my wife. You knew the pain I went through when I found out about Megan, and yet you did the same to me. Even if I believe Chloe made the first move, which I don't, you could have turned her down. I turned Megan down when she came on to me. But you? No. You went for it and kept going back for more. You stabbed me in the back, Ethan. He looked defeated but kept pressing. Why did you sell your shares to Daniel? You knew how much trouble he'd cause. I let out a dark chuckle. Because if I'd come after you myself, things might have gone differently. You aren't worth going to jail for. Besides, Daniel will give you enough grief to last far longer than anything I could have done in one confrontation. And with that, my patience snapped. I grabbed him by the collar, pulled him inside, and slammed the door shut. I unleashed months of pent-up anger, punching him repeatedly until he slumped, unconscious. Then I dragged him out and dropped him in his car, grinning as I went back inside. If the police came, I could easily say he'd attacked me, and I'd acted in self-defense. Given his recent brawl with Daniel, my story would likely hold. The next day, I sent out 14 resumes, then called my lawyer. He mentioned the hearing for the temporary restraining order was scheduled for Monday. Chloe, he said, had yet to hire an attorney. Good. The longer she delayed, the more time I had to move forward without her interference. That week, I received several interview offers. I flew to Atlanta on Wednesday and Baltimore on Thursday, feeling good about both. But when I heard from a firm in San Diego, I felt a pull toward warmer climates and arranged an interview there for the following Tuesday. Monday came, and so did the restraining order hearing. To my surprise, the judge found no grounds to uphold it, and I was required to let Chloe back into the house. She arrived with a lawyer, who tried to speak with me directly. I calmly told her to wait until my attorney was present. I just wanted to inform you I'll be stopping by tonight, Chloe stated. No, you won't, I replied. I have a job interview at 2:30 and won't be back until Wednesday evening. You can come by after 6. Her lawyer attempted to protest, but I cut him off. She won't set foot in my home without supervision. A court representative will oversee everything, and you're welcome to have your attorney present. That's unacceptable, he replied. They won't know what she's taking, and if she removes something inappropriate, it'll be difficult to retrieve it. She's managed without her things for 2 weeks. Another 48 hours won't hurt, I stated firmly. The lawyer sighed, visibly frustrated. Then we'll wait for the judge's decision, he muttered. Just as they were turning to leave, Chloe stepped forward, looking as if she had more to say. Forget it. I can wait, Chloe said softly, almost resigned. I nodded. Wednesday at 6, I confirmed, turning to leave. Wait a moment, Nick, she called. Can we talk? No, I replied, not looking back as I walked out. The interview in San Diego had gone well, and I returned home feeling optimistic. On Wednesday, at exactly 6, Chloe arrived with her lawyer's representative, as required. The court-appointed observer came early, giving us some unexpected time to chat over coffee. She explained her role as a supervisor for the court, tasked with overseeing the retrieval and documenting any disputed items. There won't be any disputes, I assured her. She can take whatever she wants. The woman looked at me, a little surprised. If you're letting her take her things, why oppose her so strongly? She betrayed me with my best friend of over 25 years, I replied, keeping my tone steady. I couldn't respond the way I wanted without facing legal consequences. So, I made things uncomfortable, gave her a taste of what she put me through. It wasn't much, but it was something. The doorbell rang, and I let Chloe and her lawyer's representative inside, greeting them briefly before stepping out to mow the lawn. When I finally returned, everyone had left, except Chloe, who was seated at the kitchen table, sipping tea. You lied, she said flatly, not looking up. You didn't donate my things to Goodwill, did you? I shrugged. Maybe not, but I enjoyed watching your reaction when you thought I had. She shook her head, a mix of anger and sadness in her eyes. Why go through all this if you were planning to leave the house to me? Why the restraining order, the lie about my belongings? That's a naive question, Chloe. After what you put me through, I needed some way to feel in control. Just be glad I chose a peaceful solution instead of something more drastic. I couldn't physically hurt you, but I couldn't let you walk away without feeling something. She sighed, leaning forward slightly. You said you didn't want to talk, but I have to say this. I don't think divorce is the answer. Chloe, let's be realistic, I replied, my voice calm but final. After what you've done, this marriage can't be salvaged. But that doesn't change how I feel about you, Nick. You know I love you. Ethan was a mistake, a terrible mistake. I've always liked him, sure, but nothing compares to how I feel about you. I never stopped loving you. I looked at her, unmoved. Your feelings don't matter now. You went behind my back, had a good time with him. Infidelity is infidelity. And remember when I found out about Megan? You saw how crushed I was. You knew what that betrayal did to me, and you still did the same thing. Doesn't my love for you count for anything? She asked, her voice almost pleading. No, it doesn't, I replied bluntly. If you loved me, it would have been enough to stop you from betraying me. But it didn't mean anything, she insisted. It was just a mistake, a lapse. It wasn't serious. A lapse? I asked, barely holding back my disbelief. Sleeping with my former best friend was just a lapse in judgment? She paused, gathering her thoughts, then took a deep breath. Ethan came over one night when you were out of town. He was devastated, still torn up over Megan. We had a drink, and he broke down crying. I hugged him to comfort him, and it happened. I knew it was wrong, but in that moment, it felt comforting. Then, the next time you went away, he came back, and we both knew what was going to happen. I took a breath, keeping my anger in check. You knew it was wrong, but you went through with it anyway. It doesn't matter if he was sad or if you were comforting him. You had a choice every step of the way. She reached across the table, her hand resting between us. There was no love, Nick. It was just a moment of weakness, curiosity, maybe even excitement. But I never stopped loving you. I looked at her hand, making no move toward it. That's the problem, Chloe. Love doesn't change what you did. I need a divorce because I can't live with someone who betrayed me. If we stayed together, I'd spend every day looking over my shoulder, wondering when it would happen again. You admitted you enjoyed the thrill. How could I ever trust you again? Her tone grew desperate. I'll do anything to prove that it won't happen again. Anything you want. It's too late, Chloe. You made your choice. I shook my head, feeling a wave of finality settle over me. And besides, your story doesn't even match Ethan's. He says you were the one driving it, that you played him like a game. So, who's lying? You or him? I don't know, and frankly, I don't care anymore. After what both of you did, I can't trust either of you. She looked down, her face pale, seemingly at a loss for words. I don't know what else to say, Nick. I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't fix anything, I said quietly. You chose to betray me, and there's no going back. Let's just end this. She sat there in silence, and I could see her struggling to accept it, but I knew she felt the truth of my words. There was nothing left to be said. I stood, walked out of the kitchen, and didn't look back. Whatever words or pleas she might still have had didn't matter. I was done. So I can't favor one story over the other, Chloe, I said. The bottom line is that we're over. I'm not giving up, Nick. I'll fight this divorce, she insisted. We love each other, and I know we can get through this. You're angry, but I'll keep my promises from now on. My lawyer says he can request court-ordered counseling. I love you, Nick. I'm not letting you go. She didn't seem to understand. Chloe, it's not just about being mad at you. Yes, I'll admit I still have some feelings, but there's no way I can live with you again. Every time we're together, I'd remember what you did with Ethan, my best friend. You're really going to go through with this? She asked. If you do, I'll release a tape of your last meeting with Ethan, I said coldly. Everyone, family, friends, co-workers, will get a copy. I'll even create a website in your name. You'll have an interesting life after that. Her face paled. That video doesn't exist. Oh. I went to the den, retrieved a disc, and handed it to her. Take a look. After you watch it, decide if you want anyone else to see it. I watched her stare at the disc in shock. Now, I need to get back to my plans. You can pick up the house Friday, but until then, you need to leave. I moved out, storing most of my things and renting a suite for a month. Over the next 2 weeks, I flew to interviews in Salt Lake City, Philadelphia, Atlanta, Chicago, and Detroit. While I felt good about each interview, I hadn't heard back from any companies. I ran the numbers and found that I could live job-free for about 6 years. I considered moving somewhere with a lower cost of living, hoping to stretch that time even further. Chloe eventually signed the divorce papers and returned them to my attorney. I felt a mix of satisfaction and slight regret. I would have enjoyed spreading copies of her and Ethan's moments around the house. But a deal was a deal. We agreed on a 50-50 split of assets, with each of us paying our legal fees. Chloe kept the house, and my share of the equity cleared my bank loan. I gave her half of what I received from selling my share of the business, but luckily, I had hidden the other two-thirds offshore. Rumors about Chloe and Ethan began circulating. Apparently, with me out of the picture, Ethan's behavior became so controlling that Chloe sought a restraining order. The irony amused me, though I wasn't concerned. I waited until the divorce was finalized before making any moves. Then, the calls from companies started. San Diego reached out, asking me to return for a follow-up interview. Before I could arrange it, Daniel called with an unexpected offer. "How'd you like your company back?" "Why would I want that, Daniel? I sold it to you to get away from Ethan. Why would I want to be his partner again?" "You wouldn't," Daniel replied, "but you don't have to." After our last argument, I told him I'd either buy him out or sell his half to someone else. He barely thought about it before selling his half to me for less than half of what I paid you. I hesitated. Why should I want it back if you've done what you said to sabotage him? It might not be worth much now. "Come see for yourself," Daniel urged. "I only bought it to mess with Ethan. Now that I've shifted focus to construction, I'm less interested in engineering. I could contract work to you for engineering and avoid handling it myself." "So, you're selling it back?" I asked, intrigued. "Yep, and it won't cost you much. Since I've moved all the construction work and equipment to my other company, what's left is pure engineering. I'll sell you the company for what I paid Ethan, plus a 5-year contract for engineering services. And we still have about 15 firm contracts lined up." I was tempted. "How much did you give Ethan?" The amount he named was less than what I'd put in my offshore account. "Sounds reasonable, but what's the catch?" "There's just one condition," Daniel replied. "I don't want any secrets with Maria, so I shared the idea with her. She said that if you agree, she'll stay on with you instead of transferring to my company. You'll get Maria on your team if you take the deal." I didn't have to think long. "All right, but I won't finalize anything until my divorce is complete, which should take about 3 weeks." "That's fine," Daniel said. We shook on it, and as I left, Maria approached with a knowing smile. "I heard. Don't forget, you promised I'd be first on your list." I laughed, surprised by her directness. "Didn't think you were serious." "Oh, I'm dead serious," she replied with a grin. As I pulled away, my phone rang. It was my lawyer. Apparently, Ethan had finally learned his lesson from what happened with Daniel. When Daniel sued him, Ethan reached out to my lawyer with a settlement offer, which I instructed him to accept. Back at my suite, I allowed myself a moment of relief. In 3 weeks, I'd start a new chapter with a new job, possibly a new relationship, and a good amount of money in the bank. I could spend those weeks finding a place to live, looking for furniture, and maybe thinking about what the future held. After all, who says nice guys always finish last?